Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The scent of myrrh and saltpeter clung to the air, a holy perfume meant to mask the sweet, cloying truth of decay. It failed. Beneath the heavy incense, the faint, undeniable smell of a body, 3 days cold, lingered in the great hall, a ghost at its own grim feast. Cold seeped through the thin soles of my ceremonial slippers, up from the stone flags polished smooth by generations of maverick wolves. I felt less like a bride and more like a sacrificial offering, dressed in a shroud of white wool so heavy it felt like it was woven with shame. Every eye in this hall was on me, the broken Omega from the failing Voshan pack, brought here to seal a desperate pact with a dead man. My own wolf, the one I was born without, was a hollow ache in my soul, a silence where a snarl of defiance should have been. They called me the mute, the barren, the wolfless, a fitting bride for a corpse. And now the final ritual was upon me, a binding that would chain my worthless life to a throne of ghosts. My father's hand was a hard, unforgiving grip on my arm, propelling me forward. He didn't look at me. None of my pack did. They looked past me at the towering figure laid out on the black stone bier. Alpha King Theros Maivrik, the Wolf of the North. His name was a legend whispered in taverns and a curse spat by his enemies. Even in death, he commanded the room. He was enormous, a giant of a man, clad in ceremonial gold armor that gleamed in the flickering torchlight. His famous golden hair, the color of a winter sunrise, was intricately braided with charms of obsidian and iron, a warrior's burial rite. His face, stark and beautiful, even with the waxy pallor of death, was a mask of noble tranquility. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, were closed forever. The maverick elder, a crone with eyes like chips of flint, stood beside the bier. Her voice was dry as bone dust as she began the incantation. We gather under the eye of the unseeing moon to bind what is broken, to mend what is sundered. We join the blood of Voshan to the legacy of Maverick. Her gaze flickered to me, devoid of warmth. It held only contempt. I was a vessel, a political necessity. My pack, the Voshans, were starving. Our lands were failing, our hunters returning with empty hands. The Maverick kingdom was strong, but its king was dead without an heir. This marriage, this grotesque necromantic pact, was a treaty written in my flesh. I would be queen regent, a puppet for the Maverick Council, until a suitable heir could be chosen from their own bloodlines. My life for my pack's survival. A fair trade, my father had said. He had not seen the way I trembled every night since the pact was made. Erlin of Voshan, the elder's voice rasped, pulling me from my daze. Present the offering. My father released me with a shove. I stumbled forward, my hands shaking. On a small velvet cushion lay a silver ritual knife. Its purpose was simple and brutal. A drop of my living blood upon his dead flesh to symbolize the merging of our lines. The final seal, my breath hitched. This was it. The moment I ceased to be Erlin and became a living monument to a dead king. I picked up the knife. The silver was as cold as the stone beneath my feet. The hall was utterly silent now, save for the crackle of the torches. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes boring into me, the hostile, grieving gazes of the maverick wolves and the desperate, ashamed stares of my own. I approached the bier. Up close, the illusion of peace shattered. The skin of his face was too tight over his strong jaw, his lips faintly blue beneath their natural color. The scent of saltpeter was sharp, stinging my nostrils. He was a beautiful, empty vessel. My hand trembled so violently, I was afraid I would drop the knife. I held my left palm over his chest, over the cold, unmoving gold of his breastplate. I had to press the blade to my own skin, draw blood, and let it fall onto the back of his hand, which rested upon his sword's hilt. Let the blood of the living awaken the bond of the dead, the elder chanted, her voice rising. Let the warmth of the she-wolf pledge fealty to the spirit of the alpha. Let the pact be sealed in flesh and memory. I closed my eyes, took a ragged breath, and pricked the tip of my finger. A single perfect crimson bead welled up. It seemed shockingly vibrant, impossibly alive in this hall of death and shadow. With a hand that felt disconnected from my own body, I reached for his. My fingers brushed against his gauntlet first, ice-cold, unyielding metal. I slid them past the cuff to the exposed skin of his hand. The cold was absolute. It was not the simple chill of a winter's night. It was a profound, grave-deep cold that seemed to suck the very warmth from my bones. It felt like touching a marble statue left out in a blizzard. Lifeless, final, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. I held my bleeding finger over his skin. The drop of blood quivered, then fell. It landed on his pale flesh, a tiny scarlet star against a landscape of snow. For a moment, nothing happened. The world held its breath. I felt a wave of dizzying relief. It was done. The ritual was complete. Then, the corpse inhaled. It wasn't a soft sound. It was a harsh, rasping gasp that tore through the hall's silence like a blade. A sound of lungs long empty suddenly, violently, fighting for air. The elder's chant died in her throat. A collective shock, a wave of disbelief, rippled through the crowd. My hand was still hovering over his. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I watched, frozen in horror, as the drop of my blood on his skin began to smoke. A faint silvery mist rose from it, and where the blood touched him, the waxy pallor of his skin began to recede, replaced by the faint flush of life. His chest, still and silent for 3 days, rose. It didn't just rise. It expanded with a sickening series of cracks and pops, like old wood snapping back into place. Ribs, broken in his final battle, were realigning themselves with audible force. A woman screamed in the back of the hall. The sound broke the spell. Panic erupted. Men drew swords, women cried out, and my father shouted my name, a strangled cry of terror. But I was trapped, mesmerized. Theros Maverick's eyes snapped open. They were not the stone-gray eyes of legend. They were glowing. A brilliant, terrifying silver-gold light poured from them, ancient and wild and utterly inhuman. They were the eyes of something that had looked upon the other side of the veil and brought a piece of it back. He sat up. The movement was not stiff or clumsy. It was fluid, powerful, and terrifyingly fast. The gold burial armor groaned with the motion. He ignored the screams, the drawn weapons, the chaos exploding around him. His head turned, and that burning, resurrected gaze found me. It pinned me in place, stripping away every defense, every lie, seeing right into the hollow, wolfless space in my soul. The world narrowed to the space between us. The noise of the hall faded to a dull roar. There was only the cold stone beneath my feet, the smell of ozone and grave dust, and the impossible light in his eyes. His lips, no longer blue, parted. A voice that was not a voice, but a gravelly echo from a place of deep silence, scraped the air. It spoke a single, impossible word. Mate. The word hung in the air, a physical thing forged of grave dust and lightning, mate. It echoed not in the hall, but inside my skull. A resonance that vibrated through my very bones. Panic, cold and sharp, was a predator's claw at my throat, stealing the air from my lungs. My heart, which had been hammering a frantic rhythm of fear, stuttered and went silent for a beat, eclipsed by the sheer impossibility of the moment. I was the wolfless, the mute. Omegas like me did not have mates, let alone an alpha king. We were rejects, footnotes in the bloodlines, our purpose to serve, not to bond. Chaos erupted around us. The single scream had become a cacophony of terror and disbelief. Maverick warriors, their training kicking in, formed a ragged, uncertain circle, their swords drawn, but their hands trembling. They didn't know whether to defend the hall from the monster on the bier, or to protect the king who had miraculously returned. My own father, his face ashen, had stumbled back, his hand outstretched toward me, in a gesture that was half warning, half useless plea. He had sold me to a dead man. He had no idea what to do with a living one. But Theros Maverick saw none of it. His glowing silver-gold eyes were locked on me, and in their depths, I saw a terrifying, possessive focus. The world outside that gaze ceased to exist. He moved, swinging his legs over the side of the stone bier. The burial armor, meant for a silent eternity, groaned and scraped against the stone. He stood, and the true scale of him hit me. He was a giant, built of knotted muscle and warrior's grace, towering over everyone in the hall. The top of my head barely reached his chest. The torches cast flickering shadows that clung to him, making him seem even larger, something carved from the heart of a mountain. The scent around him had changed. The cloying sweetness of decay was gone, burned away by something new. It was the smell of a storm breaking over ancient stones, of cold earth and ozone, of something primal and deeply unsettling. It was the scent of power, raw and untamed. "Stay back," a voice commanded. It was Lord Boren, the head of the Maverick Council, a stout man with a gray-streaked beard and eyes accustomed to authority. "It is an abomination, a trick of dark magic." Theros didn't even glance his way. He took a step toward me, then another. The floor seemed to tremble with each footfall. The crowd shrank back, a wave of bodies receding from his advance. I was left alone, an island in a sea of terror, with the resurrected king closing the distance between us. I tried to run, to force my frozen limbs to obey, but I was rooted to the spot, pinned by that incandescent gaze. This was not the man they had mourned. The Theros Maverick of legend was a fearsome but noble king. The thing walking toward me now was other. He had brought the emptiness of the grave back with him, and it clung to him like a shroud. He stopped directly in front of me, so close I had to crane my neck back to see his face. The light pouring from his eyes was mesmerizing and horrifying. I could see the fine gold hairs on his arms, the stark line of his jaw, the faint silvery scars that mapped his skin. He was terrifyingly, impossibly real. He lifted his hand in the same one my blood had touched. It was no longer the color of wax, it was flushed with life, radiating a strange, palpable heat that pushed back the chill of the hall. My breath hitched. I flinched, expecting a blow, a curse, anything but the ghost of a touch that followed. His fingers, calloused and hard from a lifetime of wielding a sword, brushed against the side of my neck, right over the frantic pulse hammering in my veins. The contact was an electric shock, not of pain, but of pure, undiluted power. It surged through me, a jolt of lightning and ice that made every nerve in my body scream. It was a current connecting his impossible life to my own, and in that instant, I felt something stir in the hollow space inside me. The ghost of the wolf I never had. It wasn't a growl, but a faint, terrified whimper. His gaze softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something ancient and knowing in those luminous depths. His thumb stroked my skin once, a possessive, claiming gesture. Then his voice came again, lower this time, a gravelly rumble that was meant for me alone, yet it carried across the entire hall. Mine. The word was a sentence and a judgment. It sealed my fate more surely than any wedding vow. Lord Boren sputtered, his face purpling with rage. "This is madness! Seize him! He is unwell!" But the warriors hesitated. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a jagged scar across his brow, slowly, deliberately, lowered his sword. He sank to one knee, his head bowed. "Alpha," the warrior breathed, his voice thick with awe and reverence. I recognized him from the whispers. Gregor, Theros' beta, his most loyal second. Gregor's submission broke the dam. A dozen other warriors followed suit, then 24. They knelt before their returned king, their fear transmuting into fierce, primal loyalty. The Maverick pack was choosing its alpha, and it wasn't the council. It was the monster who had clawed his way back from death. Theros paid them no mind. His focus remained entirely on me. He seemed to be drawing strength from our proximity, his posture straightening, the last vestiges of death's rigidity leaving him. But there was a flicker of confusion in his eyes, a momentary disorientation as he glanced around the hall, at the banners, the faces, as if seeing them through a distorted lens. He was here, but not all of him had returned. It was the elder, the old crone who had conducted the ritual, who finally broke the standoff. Her flinty eyes were wide, fixed not on Theros, but on me. The contempt she'd shown me earlier was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. The blood, she whispered, her voice cracking. It was her blood, the wolf-less. It was not a weakness, it was the key. She looked at me as if I were a sacred text she had suddenly learned how to read. The ancient prophecies. They spoke of a bond that could cross the veil, a soul with no wolf to anchor it to this world. It could form a bridge for one who was lost on the other side. Her words rippled through the hall. Whispers turned to gasps. Suddenly, I was not the mute Omega, the barren bride. I was a witch, a miracle worker, a vessel of impossible power. The way they looked at me changed from pity and scorn to fear and awe. I wasn't sure which was worse. Prophecy, Lord Bourne scoffed, though his voice trembled. This is sacrilege. That thing is not our king. It is a revenant, an unholy creature wearing his face, brought back by this Vauchan witch. He took a step forward, drawing a jewel-hilted dagger and pointing it at me. She has defiled this sacred hall and cursed our pack. She must be cleansed in fire. A wave of agreement rippled through Bourne's faction of the council. This was their chance to seize control, to paint Theros' return as a demonic event and me as the cause. Before anyone could move, a growl tore through the air. It was a sound that did not belong in a human throat. It was deep, guttural, and so full of primal menace that it vibrated through the stone floor and rattled the iron sconces on the walls. It was the sound of a predator staking its claim. Theros moved, placing his massive frame between me and Boren's dagger. He shielded me completely. The light in his eyes intensified, no longer silver gold, but a blazing molten fury. He looked at the council lord, and for the first time since his awakening, he acknowledged another's existence. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The promise of violence, of a death far swifter and more brutal than the one he had just escaped, radiated from him. Boren, who had faced down rival alphas and led armies into battle, took an involuntary step back. The man's face went pale, his bravado crumbling in the face of the raw, otherworldly power emanating from his resurrected king. He had challenged the alpha for his mate. In the law of the wolf, there was only one response. Theros' hand, which had been resting gently on my neck, dropped to his side. His fingers twitched, curling into a fist. The air grew thick, heavy with anticipation. Gregor and the loyal warriors rose slowly, their hands on their sword hilts, their eyes fixed on the confrontation. The hall was a tinderbox, and Lord Bourne had just struck the spark. The King of Whispers and Bone was about to deliver his first royal decree, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the marrow, that it would be written in blood. The growl did not fade. It settled in the air, a low, constant vibration that I felt in the marrow of my bones. Theros didn't lunge, he didn't draw a weapon, he simply moved. One moment he was a wall of muscle and fury in front of me, the next he was before Lord Boren, having crossed the 10 feet of stone between them in less than a single silent heartbeat. It was a speed that defied nature, a predator's impossible pounce. Boren's eyes widened, his bravado shattering into raw, primal fear. He tried to bring his dagger up, a pathetic, clumsy gesture. Theros' hand shot out and clamped around the man's wrist. A sharp crack echoed in the stunned silence of the hall. The jeweled dagger clattered to the floor. Boren screamed, a thin, high sound of agony as he cradled his broken arm. But Theros wasn't finished. His other hand seized the front of Boren's velvet tunic, lifting the stout lord from his feet as if he weighed nothing. Boren dangled in the air, his legs kicking uselessly, his face a mask of terror and pain. The resurrected king brought him close until they were face to face. The molten light of Theros' eyes burned into Boren's. His voice, when it came, was a low, chilling whisper that carried to every corner of the hall. It was the sound of rocks grinding together in the deep, dark places of the earth. "She is the queen," he rasped, the words scraping from his throat. "Her blood is my blood, her breath is my breath." He gave Boren a slight shake, eliciting a whimper. "Touch her again, threaten her again, and I will unmake you. I will peel the flesh from your bones and show your soul what eternity feels like from the inside out." He dropped him. Boren collapsed onto the stone floor in a heap of velvet and broken pride, scrambling backward away from Theros like a terrified crab. No one moved to help him. The message had been delivered with brutal, undeniable clarity. The authority of the council was ash. There was only the king. Theros stood over the whimpering lord for a moment longer, a terrifying statue of righteous fury. Then slowly, the incandescent light in his eyes began to recede, banking like embers after a firestorm. It didn't vanish, but it subsided into the silver-gold glow I had first seen. The tension in his massive shoulders eased slightly. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the silent, terrified assembly, cowing them all. Then his eyes found me again. The fury was gone, but the intensity remained. A focused, possessive heat that made my skin prickle. He walked back to me, each step deliberate and final. The crowd parted before him like a river around a boulder. He stopped in front of me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something other than power in his gaze. A deep, profound confusion, as if he were a stranger in his own skin, in his own hall. Then he reached out and took my arm. His grip was not painful, not crushing, but it was absolute. An iron manacle from which there was no escape. The heat from his skin seeped through the thin wool of my sleeve, a stark contrast to the deathly cold I had felt from his hand on the bier. This was the heat of a furnace, of a life burning twice as bright to keep the shadows at bay. "Come," he commanded, the single word leaving no room for argument. He began to lead me from the great hall. I stumbled after him, my legs clumsy and weak. As we passed my father, I saw the man's face, a ruin of fear and bewilderment. He had brought me here to be a widow, a pawn. He had no idea what to do now that I was a queen, claimed by a living god or a demon, he knew not which. He met my eyes for a fraction of a second, and in them I saw no comfort, only the terror of a man who had lost control of his bargain. We moved through the fortress, down long, shadowed corridors lined with ancient tapestries depicting the glories of the Maverick line. Our footsteps echoed in the profound silence. No one followed. The guards we passed flattened themselves against the walls, their heads bowed, their eyes averted. They feared him, but it was a primal, reverent fear, the kind a wolf pack affords its alpha. The scent of him enveloped me, that strange, impossible mix of cold, damp earth and the sharp, clean fragrance of pine needles. The smell of his kingdom, and the smell of the grave he had just left. He was leading me toward the royal wing, to the king's private chambers. My heart began to pound a new, frantic rhythm against my ribs. Alone. He was taking me somewhere we would be alone. The hollow space inside me, where my wolf should have been, clenched with a terror so profound it was nauseating. I had no instincts to guide me, no inner beast to gauge his intentions. I was just a girl, defenseless and mute, being led into the den of a predator, the likes of which the world had never seen. He stopped before a set of massive oak doors banded with black iron. Gregor, his beta, was already there, as if he had anticipated his alpha's path. The big warrior's face was etched with a stunned reverence, but his eyes were clear. He bowed his head low. "Alpha, the chambers are as you left them." Theros gave a curt nod, not loosening his grip on my arm. Gregor opened one of the heavy doors, and Theros pulled me inside. The room was vast and dark. Moonlight streamed through a tall, arched window, illuminating swirling motes of dust in the air. The chamber was cold, unused. A massive hearth stood empty, a four-poster bed was draped in heavy, dark furs, and the air was thick with the scent of beeswax, old leather, and something else, the faint, lingering trace of the man who had lived here before he died. It was a room holding its breath, a snapshot of a life interrupted. The heavy oak door boomed shut behind us. The sound was a final, echoing slam, cutting us off from the rest of the world. The lock clicked into place. We were alone. I pulled back instinctively, but my back was already against the cold wood of the door. Theros released my arm, but he didn't step away. He stood before me, a mountain of shadow and moonlight, trapping me with his presence. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken questions. I could hear his breathing, a slow, steady rhythm that was unnervingly calm. I could hear my own, a ragged, panicked gasp. He studied me. His glowing eyes roamed my face, my hair, the simple white wool of my ceremonial dress. It wasn't a lustful gaze. It was something far more intense, more unsettling. He looked at me like a scholar examining an ancient, powerful relic he didn't understand. He was searching for something, some sign or clue. "You're wolfless," he stated. It wasn't a question. His voice was softer now, the gravelly edge smoothed by the quiet of the room. He could scent it on me, the gaping absence that had defined my entire life. I could only nod, my throat tight with fear. He took a step closer, and I flinched. A flicker of an unreadable emotion crossed his face. He lifted his hand and I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for a blow. But his touch, when it came, was impossibly gentle. His calloused fingers brushed a stray lock of hair from my cheek. The jolt was still there, that current of ice and lightning, but this time it felt less like an attack and more like a question. I was gone, he whispered, his eyes losing focus for a second, looking at something beyond the walls of the room, beyond the world itself. There was nothing, just cold, silence, a long gray road with no end. He blinked, and his gaze sharpened, focusing back on me with unnerving intensity. Then I heard something, not a sound, a feeling, a pull. It was the only warmth in the endless cold. It was you. My breath caught in my throat. The elder's words came back to me, a soul with no wolf to anchor it, a bridge for one who was lost. He leaned in closer, his proximity overwhelming my senses. The scent of pine and rich earth, the heat radiating from his body, the sheer power of him. His face was inches from mine, his glowing eyes searching my own. You pulled me back from that road, he murmured, his voice a low, dangerous rumble of discovery and demand. You anchored me. Now, you will tell me how. His question was a cage, its bars forged from the glowing intensity of his gaze and the close, suffocating air of the chamber. You will tell me how. It was a command from a king accustomed to immediate obedience, a demand from a being who had bent the rules of reality itself. And it was a question I had no voice to answer. The silence in my throat was a stone, heavy and absolute. Fear had stolen what little sound I could sometimes manage, the whispered single-word replies that were the best I could offer on a good day. This was not a good day. I shook my head, a small, desperate movement. My hands came up in a gesture of helplessness, of pleading. I opened my mouth, willing a word, any word to form. A sound, a croak, anything to prove I wasn't defying him. But only a choked, soundless breath escaped. Panic clawed at me, cold and sharp. He would think I was being insolent. He would think I was hiding some witch's secret. He would break me as he had broken Lord Boren. His jaw tightened. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of frustration that vibrated through the floorboards. The silver-gold light in his eyes flared, becoming hotter, more dangerous. Do not play games with me, girl, he rasped, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I have returned from a place where lies burn away like mist. I can feel the truth of you. You are the anchor. You are the tether. Tell me why. He took another step, closing the last inch of space between us. His massive hands came up and slammed against the door on either side of my head, caging me completely. The wood shuddered with the impact. I squeezed my eyes shut, my entire body trembling, a trapped animal awaiting the final blow. I was nothing, a broken omega, a political sacrifice. How could I be the key to life and death? The elder's words, my father's desperate pact, the hatred in Boren's eyes. It all swirled into a terrifying tapestry of a fate I had never asked for. He leaned down, his breath ghosting across my cheek. It was cool, like the air from a deep cave. Look at me, he commanded. Slowly, shakily, I forced my eyelids to open. His face was inches from mine, a landscape of stark plains and shadows, made otherworldly by the glow of his eyes. I saw the fine lines at their corners, marks of a life lived with intensity. I saw a faint silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow. I saw a being torn between two worlds, the king he had been and the thing he had become. And in the depths of that luminous gaze, beneath the frustration and the power, I saw a flicker of something else, a profound, soul-deep confusion, a terrifying vulnerability. He was lost. My fear, for a single insane moment, was eclipsed by a strange, aching wave of pity. As if he sensed the shift in me, the iron tension in his body changed. The anger in his eyes softened, replaced by a raw, searching intensity. His hand moved from the door, and his fingers, rough and calloused, touched my jaw. He tilted my head up, his thumb brushing against my lips. The touch was a brand, a jolt of that same impossible energy, but this time it felt different. It wasn't a claim of dominance, but a question. He was feeling it too. The connection, the bridge. "When Boren threatened you?" he murmured, his voice losing its edge, becoming rough with dawning wonder. I felt your rage. It was not my own. It was a primal fire, an instinct more powerful than my own will. To protect, to shield, to keep. He paused, his gaze dropping to my lips. "What is this bond, girl? What have you done to me?" I couldn't answer with words, so I tried another way. I closed my eyes, focusing all my will, all my terror and confusion, on the hollow space inside me. I thought of the elder's words, a soul with no wolf to anchor it. I focused on that emptiness, that feeling of being untethered that had haunted my entire life. I tried to push that feeling toward him, through the point of contact where his thumb rested on my lips. "This is all I am, a void, an anchor made of nothing." He flinched. His hand recoiled as if burned. He stumbled back a step, his eyes wide, the silver gold light flickering wildly. "By the spirits of the deep wood," he breathed. "It's true. There's nothing, no wolf, no beast to howl at the moon." He looked at me, truly looked at me, and for the first time, I think he saw not a defiant subject or a magical artifact, but the terrified girl standing before him. "They married me to a ghost." The silence that followed was different. It was no longer a silence of threat, but one of shared shock. He paced away from me, moving to the center of the room like a caged wolf. He ran a hand through his braided golden hair, tugging at the obsidian charms as if they irritated him. He was a king forged in the crucible between life and death, and his body was a battlefield. I could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the way he moved with a fluid grace that was at odds with a deep, internal stiffness. The cracks of his bones resetting in the hall had not been the end of it. He was still knitting himself back together. "I am hungry," he said, the words sounding strange on his tongue, as if the concept were new to him. "But not for food." He stopped pacing and looked toward the empty, cavernous hearth. "I am cold. The fire on the other side. It freezes the soul. I feel it still, clinging to my bones." He walked to the hearth and placed a hand on the cold stone of the mantel. His knuckles were white. A violent shudder racked his entire frame, so powerful I could hear his teeth click together. A low groan of pure agony was torn from his throat. He leaned heavily against the mantel, his head bowed, his massive body trembling with the effort of holding itself together. The thing that had brought him back was not a gentle miracle. It was a violent, tearing force, and it was demanding a price. A sharp, frantic knock echoed from the heavy oak door. "Alpha?" It was Gregor's voice, tight with worry. "Lord Boren is gathering the elders of the council. He claims the queen is a Voshan witch who has raised a demon in your skin. He demands an immediate trial." Theros didn't move for a long moment. The only sound was his ragged breathing. Then slowly he straightened. When he turned, the agony was gone from his face, replaced by a mask of cold, regal fury. The king was back. "He is a fool who mistakes a miracle for a curse," Theros said, his voice a low, commanding thunder that passed through the thick wood of the door. "Let him gather his crows. Their cawing will not change the coming of the dawn." "What are your orders, Alpha?" Gregor asked, his loyalty unwavering. "Post my loyal guards at every entrance to the royal wing. No one enters or leaves without my express command. And Gregor," Theros added, his voice dropping slightly, "send for the healers, but have them wait in the antechamber. They are not to enter until I call." "It will be done, Alpha." The heavy footsteps retreated, leaving us once more in the echoing silence. Theros turned his gaze back to me. The mask of command was still in place, but I could see the strain beneath it. The shuddering had stopped, but a deep, unnatural pallor had crept back into his skin, a faint echo of the corpse he had been. The light in his eyes seemed dimmer. He was weakening. The life that had surged into him, the life drawn from my blood, was not a permanent gift. It was a flickering flame in a high wind. He crossed the room toward me again, his movements deliberate, weary. The hunger he had spoken of was visible now, a hollow craving in the depths of his gaze. It was a hunger that had nothing to do with food, and everything to do with the flickering candle of my soul. I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and absolute, what he needed. He stopped before me, his shadow swallowing me whole. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The question was in his eyes, in the faint tremor of his hands, in the desperate, chilling need that radiated from him like a palpable cold. He was the resurrected king, the alpha of the most powerful pack in the north, but in that moment, he was a starving man, and I was the only thing that could feed him. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, he lifted his hand, not to my face, not to my neck, but to my hand, the one with the small crescent-shaped wound from the ritual knife. His fingers, now cool to the touch, gently wrapped around mine. The moment our skin met, he inhaled sharply, a ragged, desperate gasp. A faint, silvery mist, almost invisible in the moonlight, seemed to flow from me to him. I felt a dizzying, draining cold seep into my bones, a profound weariness that made my knees weak. At the same time, I saw the color return to his face. The pallor receded, the strain in his jaw eased, and the light in his eyes brightened, burning away the shadows of the grave. He was drinking from me, not my blood, but something deeper, my life, my energy. He stared down at our joined hands, his expression a maelstrom of shock, relief, and a dawning, terrible horror. He was feeding on his mate to survive. He looked up at me, and I saw the terrible truth reflected in his glowing eyes. I had not just brought back a king. I had brought back a hunger that wore his face. He dropped my hand as if it were a hot coal, stumbling back with a look of such profound self-loathing that it struck me harder than any blow. The connection shattered. The silvery mist vanished. The warmth that had begun to suffuse his skin receded, leaving behind the chilling pallor of the grave. The weariness that had flooded my limbs lessened, but in its place was a hollow, echoing cold. I felt as if a part of me had been scooped out, leaving a void that mirrored the one where my wolf should have been. "No," he snarled, the word a ragged mess of denial and disgust. He paced to the far side of the chamber, putting the vast expanse of the moonlit room between us. He was a predator recoiling from its own nature, a wolf horrified by the taste of its own kill. "I will not be this thing, a leech, a parasite in my own skin." He slammed a fist against the stone wall, the sound a dull, heavy thud that spoke of a strength barely held in check. He didn't seem to feel the pain. His back was to me, his massive shoulders heaving with ragged breaths. The moonlight caught the intricate burial braids in his hair, the gold and obsidian glinting like a cage for a captured sun. "On the gray road," he began, his voice low and haunted, speaking more to the shadows than to me. "There is no hunger, no cold. There is only absence. An endless, silent walk toward nothing. It drains the memory of warmth. It erases the feeling of a full belly, of the sun on your skin, of a lover's touch." He turned his head slightly, his glowing eyes catching mine in the gloom. "But this is worse. This hunger has a name, it has a face." He looked away again, unable to meet my gaze. "It is a desecration." I watched him, my own fear warring with a strange, burgeoning understanding. He was not a demon. He was a man trapped, a king whose soul had been tethered to a body that no longer knew how to live. The power that had resurrected him was an imperfect magic, a crude patch sewn by my life force onto the shroud of his death. Without me, the stitches would break. I leaned against the door, my legs still trembling from the drain. I was weak, yes, but the weakness was different from the helpless fragility that had defined my life. This was the weariness of a smith after a long day at the forge, the ache of a muscle that has been used for the first time. It was the ache of purpose. My entire existence, I had been defined by what I lacked. The wolf, the voice, the strength. Now my greatest lack, my soulless anchor, had become my greatest power. The irony was a bitter pill, but it was not poison. For the first time, I felt something other than shame for what I was. A shudder racked his frame again, more violent this time. He braced himself against the wall, a low groan escaping his lips. I could see it happening, the life I had given him being consumed by the relentless cold of his undeath. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, to crawl closer to him, to cling to the edges of his form like eager wraiths. The scent of grave dust and damp earth grew stronger, overpowering the clean scent of pine. He was dying again. The thought struck me with the force of a physical blow. If he fell, Lord Bourne and his council would descend like vultures. They would call me a witch, the failed architect of a demonic resurrection. My life would be forfeit. My Pax Treaty would be void. My father's desperate gamble would have doomed us all. My survival was now inexplicably, terrifyingly tangled with his. He pushed himself away from the wall, forcing himself to stand tall, a king refusing to bend. But it was a losing battle. The light in his eyes was fading, the brilliant silver gold dimming to a weak, flickering pewter. He took a stumbling step toward the center of the room, his movements losing their fluid grace. "Gregor," he called out, his voice strained, lacking the booming authority it had held before. He was calling for the healers. He was choosing a slow, agonizing slide back into the gray rather than feeding on me again. It was a noble choice. It was a foolish one. It would kill them both. I made a decision. It was not born of love or loyalty or any of the tender emotions sung by the bards. It was forged in the cold, hard pragmatism of survival. I was the key. I was the bridge. And I would not let the far side of that bridge crumble into dust, taking me with it. I pushed myself off the door. My legs were unsteady, but I found my balance. I walked toward him, across the stretch of cold stone that separated us. Each step was a defiance of a lifetime of fear, of cowering, of making myself small and invisible. He heard me coming, his head snapping up. His eyes widened as I approached, a mixture of warning and a desperate, primal hope warring in their fading light. "Stay back," he ordered, his voice a weak rasp. "Erilyn, stay away from me." It was the first time he had said my name. It sounded strange and melodic in his gravelly voice, a lonely bell tolling in a forgotten church. It did not stop. Me. I reached him as another shudder took him, forcing him to one knee. He fought it, his jaw clenched, his body a war zone of life and death. I did not hesitate. I knelt in front of him, on the cold stone floor, and I took his hands in mine. They were freezing. The chill was even deeper than before, a profound, soul-sucking cold that seemed to leach the very air from my lungs. The moment I touched him, the connection sparked back to life. He gasped, a sharp, ragged sound of both agony and relief. He tried to pull away, his fingers twitching in my grasp, but his strength was gone. "Don't," he pleaded, his head bowed. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I thought. My will a silent, stubborn shout in the hollow of my soul. I held on tighter, focusing not on my fear, but on my purpose. I closed my eyes and pictured the bridge the elder had spoken of. I was the foundation on this side. He was the foundation on the other. I poured my energy across it, not as a passive source being drained, but as a conscious offering. "Live," I commanded in the silence of my mind. "Live, you fool, and keep us both alive." This time, the sensation was different. It was still a drain, a hollowing out, but it was controlled. I could feel the silvery stream of my life force flowing into him, a river reversing its course. I felt his own energy, a cold, stagnant thing, being pushed back, revitalized. And with the flow of energy, something else came back across the bridge. Echoes, flickering images, sensations not my own, flooded my mind. The feeling of immense weight, of earth pressing down, the taste of blood and the thrill of a hunt under a full moon, the roar of 1,000 loyal voices shouting his name. Then the gray, the endless silent road, the profound loneliness, the feeling of his own soul slowly unraveling, forgetting the sound of his own name. I felt his death, the splintering of bone, the last ragged breath, the final fading beat of a heart that had been a drum for a kingdom. And then I felt his horror as he woke up, a stranger in his own body, tethered to a ghost of a girl he had never met. A tear escaped my closed eye, tracing a cold path down my cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of overwhelming, shared experience. For a fleeting second, I understood him. I understood the king, the warrior, and the terrified soul lost between worlds. The flow slowed. I felt him growing stronger, his hands warming in mine. The deep chill receded from his skin. He took a deep, steadying breath, the first truly solid breath I had heard from him. The light in his eyes reignited, burning away the pewter gray and returning to their brilliant silver-gold glory. The king was back. I opened my eyes. He was already looking at me, his expression stripped bare of anger and pride. What remained was a raw, staggering awe. He was seeing me for the first time, not as a political bride or a magical tool, but as the woman who had willingly walked into the heart of his storm and held him together. He lifted a hand, his touch now warm and steady, and gently brushed the tear from my cheek. "Erilyn," he whispered, his voice resonating with restored power. His gaze was a brand, a claim more absolute than any growled word of possession. He saw my choice, my defiance, my strength. And in that moment, the bond between us changed. It was no longer just a mystical tether. It was a pact, sealed not by a ritual, but by a shared glimpse into the abyss. Before he could say another word, a tremendous crash echoed from the oak door. Wood splintered, shouts erupted from the antechamber. "By order of the council, open this door." It was Boren's voice, bellowing with self-righteous fury. "The witch must face justice." Another crash, louder this time. The iron hinges groaned in protest. Theros rose to his full, towering height, pulling me up with him. He moved me behind him, shielding me with his body. The fear was gone from him, replaced by the cold, absolute certainty of an alpha whose den was under attack. He faced the door, a low, predatory growl building in his chest. The echoes of the other side were gone. The king of whispers and bone was fully present, fully awakened, and fully enraged. The door shuddered one last time, and then burst inward with a deafening crack of splintering oak. Lord Boren stood framed in the doorway, his face flushed with victory, flanked by a dozen of his loyal council guards. "Seize the—" he began to command, his eyes wild with triumph. Then he saw Theros, not the weakened, shuddering creature he had imagined, but the Alpha King, radiant with impossible life and incandescent rage. Boren's triumphant command died in his throat, his face draining of all color. He had not come to arrest a witch. He had come to witness a reckoning. Lord Boren's triumph curdled into abject terror. The man who stood before him was not the frail, resurrected creature his spies had reported. This was the Wolf of the North in his prime, radiating a vital energy so potent it was a physical force, pressing the air from the room. The silver-gold light of his eyes was not the flicker of a dying candle. It was the steady, merciless blaze of a forge fire. Boren's guards, who had followed him with the bravado of men certain of their victory, faltered. Their swords, raised to seize me, now felt heavy and useless in their hands. They had come to challenge a witch, and had instead broken into the den of a god. From my place behind Theros, I felt the shift in the very atmosphere of the castle. It was more than just the fear of the men in the doorway. It was a change in the current of power that flowed through the pack. Allegiances, once solid as stone, were fracturing and reforming around the impossible, undeniable truth of the king's return. I could feel it, a low hum of energy that resonated in the hollow space inside me. The echoes of his soul that I had touched had left a residue, a new sense of perception. I could feel the wavering loyalty of the guards, the blind panic of Lord Boren, and the unshakable, granite-like devotion of Gregor, who now stood just outside the splintered frame, his hand on his greatsword, his eyes fixed on his alpha. Theros did not move. He did not need to. He let the silence stretch, letting Boren's arrogance collapse under its own weight. "You have broken the door to my private chambers," Theros said, his voice deceptively calm, a low rumble that promised a storm. "You have raised your voice, and your weapons, against your queen." He took a slow, deliberate step forward, and Boren's men scrambled back, stumbling over each other to create distance. "You have come, with armed men, to the den of your alpha to challenge his rule." He paused, letting each accusation land like a hammer blow. "By the old law, Boren of the Stone Ridge, you have committed 3 acts of treason. For any one of them, your life is forfeit." Boren, his face the color of old parchment, found a sliver of his voice. "She is a witch," he croaked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "A Voshan snake who has brought a dark magic into this hall. That is not our king, it is a shell, possessed by some foul spirit she summoned." It was a desperate, foolish gamble, an attempt to sow fear and doubt, but it was too late. The men were not looking at me with superstitious fear anymore. They were looking at Theros, at the raw, living power of him, and they saw not a demon, but their returned alpha. A low, dangerous laugh rumbled in Theros' chest. A shell? He raised a hand, flexing his fingers. The air crackled with a visible energy, a faint shimmer of ozone. Does a shell command the winds, Boren? Does a spirit hold the heart of the pack in its hand? He turned his gaze from the trembling lord and swept it over the assembled guards, both Boren's and his own. I am Theros Maverick. I have walked the grey road and returned. I have seen the endless silence, and I have heard the call of my mate, the anchor of my soul, your queen. He turned then and looked at me. The fury in his eyes gentled, replaced by that same raw, staggering awe from moments before. In front of the entire assembly, traitors, loyalists, and the undecided, he reached back and took my hand. His touch was warm, solid, and possessive. He drew me from behind him, placing me at his side. He did not hide me, he presented me. He lifted my hand, the one with the crescent scar, and pressed his lips to the back of it. The gesture was not one of a king to a subject. It was one of reverence, a wolf bowing its head to the moon. A current of pure energy surged through me, a silent affirmation of our bond that was more potent than any spoken vow. Her blood is the fire in my veins, he declared, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. Her spirit is the anchor that holds me to this world. To threaten her is to threaten the heart of this kingdom. To question her is to question the judgment of the fates themselves. He released my hand but kept me at his side, his arm a possessive, unyielding bar of muscle behind my back. She is not a witch. She is a miracle. Our miracle. The words sealed Boren's fate. I saw it in the eyes of the guards. They lowered their swords. Some of them looked to the floor, ashamed. Others looked at Theros with a renewed, fervent adoration. Boren was no longer a political rival. He was a heretic, a blasphemer who had spat upon a gift from the gods. I will not simply execute you, Boren, Theros continued, his voice dropping to a chilling, formal tone. Your crime was public. Your judgment must be as well, a lesson etched into the memory of this pack for all time. He looked past the ruined door to the moonlit sky visible through the high windows of the hall. The old law is clear. When the Alpha's chosen mate is challenged, the challenger does not face the Alpha's justice. He faces the moon's. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Even Gregor's stony expression shifted, his eyes widening in understanding. The elder, who had pushed her way through the crowd, her face a mask of horrified awe, breathed a single shaky word. The blood claim. Theros nodded, his gaze locking onto Boren's. The blood claim, he affirmed. You have questioned the legitimacy of my queen and our bond. You will therefore meet me at the Heartstone at the rising of the full moon, 2 nights from now. There you will fight me, not as a king and a subject, but as 2 wolves fighting for the right to lead. Boren's face, if possible, grew even paler. This was not an execution. This was a ritual slaughter. The Heartstone was a sacred ancient place where the pack's most profound disputes were settled in blood. If you defeat me, Theros said, the words laced with a cold, dark amusement, then your claim will be proven. You will be the new Alpha, and you may do with my shell and my queen as you see fit. The pack will follow you. He let the impossible prospect hang in the air for a beat. But if I defeat you, and the moon will be my witness, Boren, I will defeat you. Your life is not the only price. Your name will be struck from our histories. Your lands will be forfeit. Your entire bloodline will be branded as oath-breakers, cast out from this pack for 7 generations. It was a sentence worse than death. It was the complete and utter annihilation of a legacy. Boren stared at him, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. He had gambled for power, and he had lost everything. Take him, Theros commanded. Confine him to his chambers. Allow him 2 days to make peace with his ancestors. He will have need of it. Gregor and 2 of the royal guards stepped forward. They did not need to draw their weapons. Boren was a broken man. They took him by the arms and led him away, his feet shuffling on the stone, his head bowed in the absolute finality of his defeat. The rest of his men dropped to their knees, their heads pressed to the floor, begging for the Alpha's mercy. Theros ignored them. He turned to the elder. You will prepare the Heartstone. You will summon the old spirits. This will be done according to the most ancient of our rites. The pack must see. The moon must bear witness. The old crone bowed low, her flinty eyes alight with a terrifying, zealous fire. "It will be as you command, Alpha King. The bond will be sealed in blood, as the prophecy foretold." Then, with a final dismissive wave of his hand, he cleared the hall. The guards, the council members, the servants, they all scrambled to obey, melting back into the shadows of the castle. Soon, only Gregor remained, standing sentinel at the threshold of the ruined doorway. The silence returned, heavy and profound. Theros stood for a long moment, his back to the empty hall, a king who had just cemented his reign in blood and ancient law. The tension finally drained from his shoulders. He turned to me, and the awesome, terrifying power of the Alpha King receded, leaving the man who was tied to my soul. His glowing eyes searched my face, looking for fear, for horror. I am sure he found it, but he must have seen something else too. The fragile steel thread of resolve that had held me together as I willingly poured my life into his. "I am sorry you had to see that," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. I shook my head, finding the strength to meet his gaze without flinching. "He gave me no choice," Theros continued, more to himself than to me, "to allow such a challenge to stand. It would have invited 1,000 more. It would have meant a life of you looking over your shoulder. I will not have my queen, my mate, live in fear." His hand came up, his thumb gently tracing the line of my jaw. The touch was no longer a question or a claim, it was a comfort, a promise. "This ritual," he said, his expression grim. "The blood claim, it is brutal, it is violent, but it is final. When his blood soaks the heartstone, our bond will be sanctified in the eyes of the pack, the ancestors, and the moon itself. No one will ever dare to question you again." I looked into his eyes, into the swirling silver and gold, and I saw the truth of his words. This was the world I was now a part of, a world of primal laws and bloody consequences. He was offering me safety, a sanctuary forged in violence. But as I looked at him, the victorious king, the resurrected Alpha, I felt a new, chilling premonition take root in my soul. I remembered the echoes of the other side, the unnatural hunger in his blood, and the words of the elder, the prophecy. What the moon demanded was not just Boren's blood, it was a sealing, a final, irrevocable binding. And I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than thought, that when the blood moon rose over the heartstone, the price of my safety would be far more than just a traitor's life. It would be the last vestiges of the girl I once was, burned away to sanctify the queen I was forced to become. A year had passed. One full turn of the seasons, each one a testament to the impossible life that now beat within the heart of the Maverick Kingdom. I stood on the high stone balcony of our chambers, the same room where he had caged me against the door in his resurrected fury. Now it was a sanctuary. The first snow of winter was falling, fat silent flakes drifting down to blanket the courtyard and the sleeping kingdom beyond. The air was sharp and clean, smelling of frost and pine, and it no longer chilled me to the bone. A heavy cloak of white wolf fur, a gift from Theros, was draped over my shoulders, and his arms were a warm, solid wall around me, his chest a furnace at my back. The memory of the blood claim was a scar on the soul of the pack, a brutal and necessary surgery that had cut out the rot of dissent. I had not watched. Theros had forbidden it, but I had felt it, through the bond that now pulsed between us like a second heart. I had felt the cold fury of the Alpha, the chilling finality of the old law, and the moment Boren's lifeblood had soaked the ancient heartstone, sanctifying our union in the eyes of gods and wolves. There had been no more challenges. The story of the wolfless Omega who had called her Alpha back from the Grey Road, and the king who had defended her with the moon's own fury, had become a legend whispered by firesides. I was no longer Erlin the Mute, the Baron. I was the Moon Queen, the anchor, the heart of their returned king. Theros rested his chin on the top of my head, his breathing a slow, steady rhythm against my hair. The terrible, consuming hunger that had haunted his first days back was gone, replaced by a constant, quiet hum of need that had become the rhythm of our life. Every morning and every night we would sit, my hands in his, and I would feel the gentle, willing flow of my energy into him. It was no longer a draining, it was a sharing, a communion. It left me tired but whole, and it kept the last vestiges of the grave's chill from his bones. In return, he filled the hollow space inside me. The echoes from the other side had never fully faded. They had become a part of my senses. Through him, I could feel the pulse of the land, the collective mood of the pack, the rustle of a fox in the distant woods. He gave me a connection to the world I had never known, a voice that spoke not in sound but in feeling, in pure, unfiltered knowing. I had not spoken a word since the day of the wedding, and yet I had never felt more heard. "The first snow," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against my spine. "A year ago, I did not think I would ever feel the cold again, or the warmth." He tightened his arms around me. "You gave me back the seasons, Erilyn." I leaned back into his embrace, closing my eyes and sending a wave of contentment and love across our bond, my silent answer. I could feel his smile against my hair. This was our language now, a constant, flowing conversation of emotion and sensation that was more intimate than any spoken word could ever be. He was different from the king of legend, the man who had died on a battlefield. That Theros had been a solitary peak, a formidable and respected alpha who stood alone. The man who had returned was more. He carried the echoes of the endless silence within him, a profound gravity that made his laughter richer, his rages more terrifying, and his quiet moments of tenderness more precious. He was a king who understood the true value of a single heartbeat, because he had known the eternity without one. He shifted, turning me in his arms to face him. The silver gold light in his eyes was a soft, steady glow now, as familiar and comforting to me as the moonlight that bathed the balcony. He searched my face, his gaze holding that same reverent awe it had held the night he first realized what I was to him. "The elder came to me this morning," he said quietly, his large, calloused hands coming up to cup my face. His thumbs stroked my cheeks, sending a familiar shiver of warmth through my entire body. "She has been reading the ancient texts, the prophecies she once dismissed as folklore." I waited, my heart giving a strange, expectant flutter. "The prophecy of the anchor did not end with the Alpha's return," he continued, his voice thick with a strange new emotion. "It spoke of the bond, of a bridge between life and death. It said that such a bridge was not merely a path for a soul to return, but a garden where new life, impossible life, could take root. Life that belongs to both realms." My breath caught in my throat. My hands went instinctively to my stomach. I had been feeling different these past few weeks, a strange, deep weariness that our nightly ritual no longer fully soothed, a subtle shift in the flow of my own energy. I had dismissed it as a lingering effect of our unique bond. Theros's glowing eyes dropped, following my hands. A look of pure, unadulterated wonder dawned on his face. He knelt slowly, majestically, on the cold stone of the balcony, his kingly pride forgotten. He was no longer the Alpha of the North, but a man before a miracle. He gently placed his hand over mine, on the soft wool of my dress, and then I felt it. Through him, through the echoes of the other side that he carried, he could perceive things I could not. He pressed his forehead to our joined hands, and I felt the wave of his awe, his utter, soul-shaking disbelief and joy, crash over me through the bond. He could feel it. A tiny, nascent flicker, a soul not yet fully formed, a spark of impossible life taking hold in the place where the world of the living and the whispers of the dead had been woven together. A child. Our child. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. The mute. The wolfless. The barren. The fates had a cruel sense of humor, and an even more profound sense of grace. He looked up at me, his face illuminated by the moonlight and the glow of his own impossible eyes. The king who had died and the queen who had never truly lived were about to create a life that would defy every law of nature. "A kingdom of dawn," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion as he quoted the final forgotten line of the prophecy the elder had shared with him. He rose, pulling me into a fierce, desperate embrace, burying his face in my hair. "You have given me back the world, Erilyn, and now you have given me a new one." I held him, my silent tears soaking into his tunic, my heart overflowing. The cold snow fell around us, blanketing the world in a pristine, silent peace. Here, on this balcony, suspended between the dark forest and the winter sky, the corpse and the ghost had found their forever. We were the beginning of a new legend, a new line, forged not in strength and fury, but in the quiet, unyielding power of a soul that had refused to be empty. And for the first time in my life, the silence within me was not a void, but a song.